Elmer, I'm interested in the dialogue between religion and sociology, and so I have looked for someone who is also interested in this topic to speak with me, and I'm pleased that you've taken time out of a busy schedule to carry on this conversation. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your own background in this field? You are a professor of sociology, and would you just tell me a little about your personal interest in the field and background and what it does for you?
Right. Okay, thank you, Jim. I'm happy to be here to talk with you about this subject. We've talked many times in the past about different subjects and indeed have even taught a course together, and I've always enjoyed talking with you. Okay, so in terms of undergraduate, it was in literature and philosophy in the humanities very strongly. Then switching to sociology at the graduate level, and continuing as a practicing sociologist for about 30 years now, and enjoying it and continued to read and study and reflect. And sociology writ large in the sense of involving other disciplines of psychology, philosophy, and especially anthropology. So a lot of the things that we'll be talking about cross over these disciplines of psychology, philosophy, theology, literary analysis, study of myth and symbol, Joseph Campbell, for example. So we will be leaping from one mountaintop to another, as it were, and we're not bound by any disciplinary boundaries.
I think that's true, and theology has always had a lot of different dialogue partners. Traditionally, it had the partnership with philosophy, and so we know Augustine used a lot of Neoplatonism, and Aquinas used the thought of Aristotle, and our contemporary theologians, like my mentor Karl Rahner, used a lot of existentialist thought. So philosophy's been the typical dialogue partner, and then we reached another phase where I think the main dialogue was with psychology, and religions saw the great enemy in Freud to begin with, but then they also saw some openings in the humanistic psychologist, and so there was a sort of natural tendency to go back to religious experience and to allow the psychologist to enable us to sort that out, understand it in greater depth. But I think this dialogue with sociology and religion is really enriching and not as well known and important to pursue. What sociology does for us theologians is remind us of the social construct, of the input of society, reminds us of the importance of institutions and so on. And I think that's where I want the discussion to go. I have a focus, Elmer. I want to talk a lot about religion as a symbol system and how it goes functionally, but just a little broader yet on this religion-sociology dialogue.
Okay, that's fine, Jim. That's well stated. Now, as there was a natural affinity between theology and philosophy, there was also a certain natural inclination to reach out to psychology because both disciplines are interested in the phenomenology of human experience, the individual, self-awareness, self-consciousness, and cognate experiences such as guilt and so on. And that's fine. Now, when you go to sociology and anthropology, on the other hand, you're going to what might be called the macro level in academic jargon. So you're going to a level beyond the individual, to the environment, to the context, to the situation, to external factors, as you were starting to say there about groups, institutions, society, social classes. So it complements then the individual phenomenological type of analysis and brings in the other side of the coin, micro, macro. Now, as we move to the macro, it gets more abstract, however, so it will be incumbent on us to try to discuss it in ways that people can relate to. Everybody knows what anxiety and fear is, but not everybody knows what social stratification and social classes and so on.
Well said, Elmer, and I think that's what makes the dialogue more difficult. And it's not as apparent I mean, just in a layman's term, it's not so quickly apparent how we are influenced by institutions, by structures, by social systems as religious people. But however, I've become convinced with my own dialogue with sociology that we are extremely influenced by that, and we miss it to our own peril. Much of the theological world has not seen that. I mean, if you take there's been very little effort to understand the development of doctrine, for example, in relationship to the societal situation in which it occurred. If you go back to the Council of Nicaea, I mean, you had the Emperor Constantine being a major force. In fact, he calls the council, and he really runs it effectively. Well, you can't understand the Nicene Creed said at Mass without understanding Constantine.
Or infallibility, as Hans Kung did.
That's right, in 1890.
Right.
Where
what was the historical era out of which that emerged.
Right. And that seems to be so important. Now, Elmer, let's look specifically now at this notion that we get from the sociologist about religion as a symbol system. That's an interesting phrase to me, and it gives us a different feeling. Often we say, well, religion is my personal relationship to the deity. And you can talk like that, and people understand that, and everyone has some sort of personal relationship. They might say it with Christ or the Spirit or something else. But what we've got is a different kind of understanding among the sociologists when they talk about religion. Just let me give you a couple of them. Here's Robert Bellah, a well-known sociologist who's written Habits of the Heart and more recently The Good Society. He defines religion this way: a set of symbolic forms and acts which relate human beings to the ultimate conditions of their existence. Now, so we got right away. What is it here? Essentially, it's a set of symbolic forms and acts. Now, here's from Clifford Geertz. A lot of the theologians like his work and borrow from it. He says, religion is a system of symbols which act to establish, this gets a little more abstract here now, but let me just go through it, which act to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods. So the symbols give us moods, and motivation. They give us motivation, reasons for doing things. And it says, how does it do this, or in what fashion? By formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with an aura of factuality, that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Now, I said it gets a little abstract, but I don't want to get away from the major idea here of Geertz and Bellah and other sociologists that religion is a symbol system, a package of symbols that function in different ways for us.
Yes, I think those two definitions are very indicative of what we're talking about, how sociology, as with Bellah, and anthropology with Geertz, and how they conceive of religion, and both quite similar, highly, highly respected scholars, very well thought of in all circles. So here you can see beautifully theology, the ultimate, and then sociology with these external symbols, customs, rituals, traditions, producing, acting on the individual, and evoking certain very deep, profound emotions, intimations of immortality, of the holy, of the sacred. They're coming from the outside. So it's not just the phenomenology of the individual, but how the individual is affected from these external symbols and rituals. And they'll never use the term mere symbol or mere ritual, but rather they are taken very seriously.
Right, because they do function effectively for people. So what we're saying is if you grow up in Thailand in a Buddhist culture, then the Buddhist religious tradition shapes the art of that you see around. It shapes the institutions. It's part of governmental structure in a way. And all of that, so you grow up in this and you're taken to the Buddhist temple on special occasions. It becomes part of your thinking. You
even
ingest
landscaping, tea ceremony, every area of life.
Every area of life, and you begin to drink it in, and it affects your consciousness even though you don't realize it. You could ask a person walking around in Thailand what influence Buddhism has on them, and some people might say none, and yet the fact of the matter is that they are greatly influenced by it because you can't avoid it. It's in the institutions, it's in the society and the culture in which you live. You ingest the symbols, you drink them in, they become part of you.
Yes, it's analogous as you said, to the air, or some people said, as with the fish swimming in the water but never discovering the water.
Mm-hmm.
He's just wrapped in it and encapsulated in it, but not able to transcend it and rise above to see it and to analyze its impact on the fish until it's thrown on the dry ground and sees the consequences.
I'd say this has even becomes true of sociologists, modern ones, who understand the principle. That is, very often they will find themselves really functioning out of some other value system or some other motivation or some cultural presuppositions that they don't notice. And it's only later sociologists that can look back and say, well, look, they were still imprisoned in certain cultural norms here that they didn't even recognize.
That's right. So what kind of lever can you use to get outside of your own intellectual tradition and baggage to get some type of objectivity? And, of course, Carol Mannheim wrote on that and had a nice analysis on it, sociology of knowledge, but we won't get into that now.
Yeah, but you're right, though. You do need the help. Now, let's take the average person. The average person can often do that like through travel or learning another language, or listening to the prophetic figures within their own culture. So there are ways in which we can break out and see it from a different perspective. Ordinary people, you don't have to be a scholar, but just, college students could talk to international students and quickly get the impression that they see the world differently, and different world views.
And that's why in the realm of cultural preservation and art exhibits and so on, they'll try to use multi-mode, multi-dimensional presentations where you'll have the art, the music, the dance, the architecture, the literature, the cuisine of the culture, and they'll try to bring them all together to give a total configuration.
Okay, Elmer, let's look a little bit at how these symbols function, if we've got a decent hold on them. Although I must say, before we do that, let me just take another stab at trying to see how they function generally.
How about first if you would say what you mean by a symbol?
That's a very good point, right. Yeah, we do need to tease that out a bit. So, concretely, if you look at Christian people, understand they would say, well, Christ is our main symbol. And his own linguistic symbol was the kingdom, the reign of God. Or we'd say the cross is a symbol for us. Or we would say the celebration of the Lord's Supper is a symbolic action for us. So that begins to give a concreteness to what we mean by symbol. So what we're saying is a religion is a whole bunch of those things.
Right.
So that the Jewish person has a symbol system. They have the Exodus story that's part of it. They have the celebration of the Passover. They have the Hanukkah. There's a whole institutional framework of going to the synagogue or interacting with the rabbi, and the whole importance of the Torah, the law. All that becomes their symbol system. And it's all interrelated. The symbols are not just sitting there side by side, but they have a coherence in the mind of the believing person. So for the Christian, it all centers on Christ, the major symbol. Now, let's say, in general, what those symbols do. Now, one of the things they do is they evoke emotions and memories and past dreams. The symbols are, when you hear them or go through them, it resonates. It's like what happens with people when they go to weddings. People at weddings can often resurrect through that symbol system their own wedding. They'll think 20 years ago, 30 years ago, just how they felt, and there's a strong emotion connected with that. It's an example of the way symbols are evocative of emotions and memories.
Yes, that's a good example, Jim. So, and moreover, not only do they evoke these very profound and deep and usually subconscious emotions and nostalgia, but they invoke them in a way that words cannot. That they reach out and they express the incommunicable, the unexpressive, and the incommensurable. So they have that unique power. They can pull out things that the word cannot. So for me to say flag, stars and stripes, is not the same thing as the cloth fluttering with the national anthem before the athletic contest. So music, art, very strong. In fact, right now a colleague and I are studying the role of music in sport to evoke different emotions, such as Rocky, the boxer. such as the runners in the English film in Scotland. I can't think of the Chariots of Fire, and football fight songs, and Take Me Out to the Ball Game. They're all evoking very different emotions. Some are very elegant and soft and graceful, of the Chariots of Fire. Some are very aggressive and assertive, like Rocky. And then some are very nostalgic and pastoral and serene, of the baseball at the Wrigley Field, or wherever it may be, you see.
That's wonderful, Elmer. It brings back quickly, just as you said, I remember viewing one of Mike Tyson's heavyweight fights that ended in the first round, being personally present, and the way music was used to rev up the crowd, or as the boxers came in. It was quite a striking experience. And again, connected with sport, and you could also do it in connection with so many other factors in our culture.
Including religion.
Of course.
In fact, they did a whole special hour-long, Bill Moyers, on one song, the Amazing Grace.
You know,
what
Elmer,
that song does.
Yes, just recently, Elmer, I was celebrating a funeral, a memorial mass for a slain student, and the opening hymn was Amazing Grace, and it had a tremendous power. And I imagine that everyone present there will associate Amazing Grace from now on with the memorial for the young woman who died.
That association would be there. And that one is a particularly interesting example of how a symbol that evolved out of a very different context, that is, a slave driver, John Newton in England, who was born again and in a sea storm, and pledged that if he were to get home safely, he would not trade in slaves anymore. And then it was taken up by so-called Negro spiritual, just the other side of the coin, and now it's become yuppified, and it's now the favorite song at yuppie birthday parties at a party room of a motel on a bagpipe. That's a long journey. So
yes,
it's evoking these powerful responses in very different types of people in very different periods of time.
There's no doubt about it. Let me take another meaning of this symbol that we might try to get at here, is what it does, and it summarizes it this way and said it reveals the hidden depths found in human experience. Whereas not only evoking memories and imaginations and strong feelings from the past, so on, but that it's uncovering the depth dimension of life that is often hidden. In other words, it speaks to us of realities that don't meet the eye, that the superficial glance misses. So I believe that that's another way, and again, this is so obvious with religious symbols. That's exactly what we think happens when you come to celebrate the Lord's Supper, that it's telling us something about life that you don't see in the average beer commercial.
That's right. In fact, one might even say that laying bare, that dissection, is even more difficult every day because of all of the noise of urban industrial society and all of the distractions. And indeed, it seems that we are encouraged not to dwell on these things. So the symbols help us to break through. And usually they're associated with certain rites of passage, like births, deaths, and so on, or other times great tragedies of funerals, as you were just saying, that the normal is fractured, is broken, disjointed, and we are then open to this.
Yeah, well said, right. That's how it functions. That's a good addition, Elmer, to what I said. It fractures the ordinary perceptions, opens up another kind of depth. In fact, again, to relate that more clearly to religion, one of the things we would say is that faith, that is informed by symbols that you get from being in a symbol system, can be well seen not as the holding of a given doctrine or proposition, but a different angle of vision, a different way of perceiving the world, a different way of being oriented to reality. So that faith then takes on a different meaning in the light of the analysis that you've just given. Faith is to see through the ordinary ways that society projects reality to a greater depth.
Right. And even when deliberate attempts are made to slough off symbols in ritual, they keep rearing their head. They are unavoidable. I'm struck by the fact that a few years ago I was at a Unitarian church on Easter Sunday, And the sermon that day was on Thomas Jefferson, interestingly. And it was also the day on which they were introducing new members. So each new member, who were typically young, were initiated with a rite wherein they were presented with a rose that had previously been dipped into a bowl of water, and then they took the rose back to their pew with them. So, well, you can see very nice symbolism there of the water and the flower and the initiation and so on, symbols and ritual together, so that even in a religious tradition that tries to be very cerebral and cognitive and rational, you cannot squeeze out the symbol and ritual.
Well said. Yes, I always said that if you try to get rid of all religions and succeeded to a fair degree, it would resurrect itself tomorrow when people would gather and in some symbolic fashion try to relate to the ultimate, to their God, to the one benign power that's running the world. They would do it automatically because we are symbol-producing creatures. That's why, and that links us with the whole religious tradition. Let me say a third way in which symbols are talked about these days, and that is that they structure the imagination. They are the way we look at the world. They form like a grid through which we look at the world. Now, the clear link up with that in our tradition is Paul's reminder that we should put on the mind of Christ. We should make Christ's symbolic framework our own. We should try to see the world through his eyes. Yeah, we should turn it around so that we see it his way. And I think that again goes back to something we've learned from the sociological tradition generally, I think, that symbols structure our imagination. Once they're in the culture, then it becomes the grid through which you look at the world. So if you grow up in the United States where the flag is reverenced, where you say the Pledge of Allegiance in the schoolroom, you begin to look at the world with a certain patriotic eye. It is true, you can reject this, or you can begin to think it's silly, or you can believe that it is somehow buttressing the status quo and you don't like it, but you still are programmed to see the world through the eyes of the flag. In other words, the flag sort of sets a grid of patriotism and a whole other flock of ideas that surround that. It structures the imagination. That's what symbols do.
That is true. That is true, Jim. And then from that you derive a certain realm of security, of anchorage, of regularity, and predictability. And I find that, interestingly, in working with children, or even with animals such as dogs, if you try to short-circuit a given activity, such as a birthday party, such as reading a story, a certain way you play with a dog with a bone because you're in a hurry or something, they will let you know that the order and sequence is being interrupted and that you're not doing it right. It's not working.
Yes,
and we want you to get back into the sequence of the grid here.
Yeah,
so even children and dogs will say, that's not the way it's done.
Right. And we drink that in from the culture. The symbols structure our imagination. They determine. And what people often don't understand is the power of that. That's what sociology is reminding religious people. That's why you couldn't get rid of religion. That's why the Chinese communists will eventually fail and why the Soviet system failed religiously. You can't do it. You continue to see the world through that training.
Even though they tried to evolve analogs for the wedding ceremonies and so on, but they did not evoke these deep emotions that we were talking about because they were contrived out of whole cloth and they have to evolve.
That's right. So they made the symbols up and it never touched deeply the way religious symbols do. And I think a lot of people, a lot of secular-minded people do not see that. They don't realize this power, inherent power of religious symbols.
And I think one of the reasons is, Jim, is that they are also forces of great evil, as with Nazism and so on, and different flags and signs and slogans and little red books and swastika and different holy books that have been used as forces of oppression and super races and genocide and Holocaust and so on. So Hitler and his people used certain symbols in Nuremberg and those great rallies and eagles and so on with great power, two-edged sword.
Yes, indeed. Master manipulators can find ways to do that. I'm afraid Joseph Stalin is a great example of that, because he made a whole symbol system out of Leninism and actually did fire the imagination of many people. So he might have created it, but he found a way to make it work with a certain number of people. It didn't have sustained power. It
Right.
couldn't make it long term, but it did function effectively for a while.
Now, another thing I'd like to emphasize here, Jim, why a lot of so-called thinking people or intellectuals, whatever you want to call them, are suspicious of symbols and rituals is because, in a way, they see them as a lower form of human experience, in the sense that it's not purely cognitive. We're emphasizing the affective domain here, the realm of emotion, and so on. And so a highly sophisticated person likes to think of himself or herself as pure cognition, pure rationality, in control of the emotions, and so on, you see. So here we are emphasizing just the other side. But what we are saying is that these emotions can generate noble sentiments and experience that are truly human at the highest level.
I think that's true, Elmer, but I think also we can say the symbols generate knowledge. I could take someone like Carl Jung. Now we're in another discipline, psychology and so on, but I mean, part of his understanding is that the symbols actually help us to understand at a deeper level that there is a cognitive knowledge that occurs, a knowledge that is very integrated, very holistic. You put opposite things together, and the symbol helps you hold them together. And so I think that we really should emphasize that it touches not just the emotions, but actually does the work cognitively also. Mm-hmm. Elmer, we're running out of time here, and we have to draw this to some sort of conclusion. We started out saying we want to talk about the dialogue between religion and sociology, and what we've tried to focus on is one aspect, that is that religion is a symbol system. We looked at the definition by Bella and Gertz, who they tell us that religion should be defined that way, as an interlocking set of symbols. And then we tried to say, well, how do those symbols work? And we say, well, partly they get us in touch with emotion and imagination. Partly they structure our consciousness, and partly they reveal hidden depths of reality that we are not even aware of. And my last point is that it does have a cognitive element. But whatever else you say, symbols are crucial to religion. They're how they function, and sociologists have reminded the theologian of that important fact.